Doyun, the most feared man in Seoul, didn't flinch. When the metal door slammed shut with a sound like a clicking bone. He was used to traps. But he wasn't used to the tiny, shivering hand holding onto his pinky finger. Papa? Why is it so dark? Mirae's voice was small. She was only 6 years old. She was wearing her favorite yellow raincoat, the one with the little ducks on it. They were in a shipping container, buried deep in the belly of a cargo ship. There was no light, only the smell of salt and cold steel. Doyun knelt down. His expensive suit was ruined by the grease on the floor, but he didn't care. He pulled Mirae close. It's a game, Mirae. A long game of hide and seek. We just have to be the best hiders in the world. Suddenly, a screen on the wall flickered to life. A man's face appeared. It was Park, Doyun's old rival. Park was smiling, but his eyes were like a snake's. Doyun, Park laughed. The great iron ghost, caught because he went to a school play. How sweet. You have 24 hours before this ship reaches open water. Then, I press a button, and your container drops into the ocean. Can you save her, or will you watch her drown? Doyun's jaw tightened. His blood felt like ice. He had killed hundreds of men to build his empire, but none of that power mattered here. Kindly hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks. Doyun stood up and scanned the container. He didn't have his gun. He didn't have his phone. He only had his belt, his watch, and his brain. Mirae, I need you to sit on that crate, Doyun said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. Don't move, no matter what noises you hear. Okay. Mirae nodded, her big eyes filled with tears. I'll be brave, Papa. Doyun went to the corner of the container. He saw the air vent. It was too small for him, but it was the only way out. He looked at the thick bolts holding the vent cover. They were rusted shut. He took off his heavy silver watch. It was a gift from his father, worth $50,000. He didn't hesitate. He used the edge of the watch as a screwdriver. He twisted with all his strength. His fingers began to bleed. The metal groaned. You can't get out, Doyun. Park's voice boomed through the speakers. The steel is reinforced. You're just hurting yourself. Doyun didn't stop. Pop. One bolt flew off. Then another. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a father. And a father is the most dangerous thing in the world when his child is in a cage. Suddenly, the container tilted. The ship was moving. They were leaving the dock. Papa, the floor is moving. Mirae screamed. Doyun grabbed the vent cover and ripped it off with his bare hands. Get ready, Mirae. We're going for a walk. Doyun looked at the dark vent. It was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and the edges were sharp like knives. He looked at Mirae. She was so small, her yellow raincoat glowing in the dim light of the screen. Mirae, I need you to go first, Doyun whispered. He lifted her up toward the opening. Follow the light at the end. Don't look back. I'll be right behind you. Mirae hesitated. The vent looked like a giant's mouth. It's scary, Papa. It's too dark. Doyun kissed her forehead. You are the daughter of Doyun. Shadows are our friends. Now, go. Mirae climbed in. Doyun followed, his broad shoulders scraping against the metal. Every inch he moved felt like sandpaper on his skin. Behind them, the shipping container groaned as it was lifted by a giant crane. They were being moved to the top of the stack, the most dangerous place on the ship. Suddenly, the vent began to shake. A loud clang echoed through the tunnel. The crane had dropped the container onto the deck. Doyun grabbed Mirae's ankle to stop her from sliding. Stay still, he hissed. Through the gaps in the vent, Doyun saw guards walking on the deck below. They were carrying heavy rifles. If they heard a single sound from the vents, the game would be over before it truly started. They crawled for what felt like hours until they reached a heavy metal grating. Below them was the ship's engine room. It was loud, hot, and smelled like burning oil. This was the heart of the beast. Doyun looked through the grate. He saw 3 guards talking near a control panel. They were laughing about the iron ghost trapped in a box. One of them held a keycard on his belt. That keycard was the ticket to the bridge, and the bridge was the only place to stop the ship. Mirae, stay here and cover your ears, Doyun whispered. He kicked the grate open and dropped 20 feet, landing silently on his toes like a cat. The guards didn't even hear him over the roar of the engines. The first guard turned around just in time to see Doyun's fist. Thud. He went down instantly. The second guard reached for his gun, but Doyun was faster. He grabbed the man's arm and twisted, sending the weapon spinning into the machinery. The third guard pulled a knife, but Doyun didn't flinch. He dodged the blade and delivered a kick that sent the man crashing into a stack of oil drums. Doyun grabbed the keycard and looked up at the vent. Mirae was peeking through the hole, her eyes wide. He reached up his hand. Jump, Mirae. I've got you. She jumped, and he caught her perfectly. But as they turned to find the stairs, a loud alarm began to blare. The red light started spinning. Intruder in the engine room, a voice yelled over the speakers. Seal the exits. The heat is on. Share this story with a friend who loves thrillers. The heavy steel doors of the engine room began to slide shut. They were thick, motorized, and designed to trap anything inside. Doyun tucked Mirae under one arm and sprinted toward the narrowing gap. His boots thundered against the metal floor. Papa, the door is biting. Mirae cried out, staring at the shrinking light. Doyun didn't slow down. He dove through the opening, his shoulder grazing the cold steel just as the door hissed shut with a final thud. They were out of the engine room, but they were now in a narrow hallway filled with steam pipes. The heat was intense. Doyun could feel the sweat soaking through his shirt. He looked at the keycard in his hand. It was glowing with a small green light. He swiped it against the nearest elevator panel, but the screen flashed red, access denied. Park blocked the card, Doyun growled. He realized the villain was playing with them, watching them through the security cameras like rats in a maze. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the hallway speakers. You're fast, Doyun. But are you faster than the gas? A hissing sound started from the vents. A yellow mist began to fill the hallway. Doyun knew that smell, it was a sleeping gas used for riots. In minutes, they would be unconscious, and Park would win. Doyun ripped a piece of his silk shirt and soaked it with water from a nearby dripping pipe. He tied it around Mirae's face. Breathe through this, Mirae. Close your eyes. We're going to run. Doyun ran through the yellow fog, his eyes stinging. He didn't look for the stairs, those would be guarded. Instead, he looked for the laundry chute. It was a long, vertical drop that led to the crew quarters, but it was risky. He found the small square door and kicked it open. Mirae, hold your breath. 1, 2, 3. He jumped into the darkness. They slid down a smooth metal tube like a playground slide, but at a terrifying speed. Whoosh! They burst out of the bottom and landed in a massive pile of dirty white towels. Doyun stood up immediately, checking Mirae. She was dizzy but okay. They were in the crew's laundry room. It was quiet here, away from the alarms. We need to change, Doyun said. He saw 2 sets of crew uniforms hanging on the wall, a blue jumpsuit for a worker and a smaller set of overalls for a cabin boy. He quickly helped Mirae into the smaller clothes and threw the jumpsuit over his tattered suit. For the first time, they looked like they belonged on the ship. "Listen to me, Mirae," Doyun said, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "From now on, don't call me Papa. I am the worker, and you are my helper. We have to reach the bridge to stop this ship before it hits the open sea." But as they stepped into the hallway, they saw a line of guards walking toward them. The leader stopped and looked right at Doyun. "Hey! You two! Why aren't you at your stations?" Doyun lowered his head, hiding his face in the shadow of his cap. This was the moment. One wrong word, and the fight would start again. Doyun kept his head low, the brim of his worker's cap casting a shadow over his eyes. He grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby table to look busy. Beside him, Mirae clutched a small bucket, her knuckles white. "The pipes in Sector 4 burst," Doyun said, his voice rough and low, disguising his usual cold authority. The gas alarm went off. "We're moving the cleaning supplies before they get ruined." The lead guard narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer, the smell of cheap cigarettes and sweat following him. He looked at Doyun's hands. They were covered in grease, but they were also covered in fresh blood from the vent. "You're bleeding, worker," the guard said, reaching for the holster on his hip. Doyun didn't wait for the gun to come out. He swung the heavy wrench in a blur of motion. Clang! The wrench hit the guard's helmet, sending him spinning. Before the other two guards could react, Doyun was on them. He used the bucket Mirae was holding to shield her while he delivered two lightning-fast kicks. In 5 seconds, the hallway was silent again. "Papa, you were fast," Mirae whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. "We have to go," Doyun said, grabbing a radio from one of the fallen men. "The bridge is 4 floors up. We can't take the stairs anymore. They'll be watching the cameras." He looked up at the ceiling. He saw the massive ventilation pipes that ran like veins through the ship. They were hot, but they were the only path left that Park wouldn't expect. If you love a hero who never gives up, give this story a thumbs up. The climb through the ventilation shaft was a nightmare. The metal was burning hot from the ship's massive boilers. Doyun could feel the skin on his palms blistering, but he didn't make a sound. He carried Mirae on his back, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "It's like a volcano in here," Mirae whimpered, her face red from the heat. "Just a little further," Doyun encouraged. "We're almost at the top." He reached a small grating and peeked through. They were directly above the bridge. He could see the captain's chair, the radar screens, and the steering wheel. But he also saw Park. The villain was sitting in the captain's chair, drinking a glass of wine. He looked relaxed, watching the radar as the ship moved closer to the point of no return, the deep water where the container would be dropped. 5 minutes until the drop, Park said to the captain. "Make sure the cameras are recording. I want to watch the Iron Ghost sink." Doyun's grip on the grating tightened until the metal began to bend. He wasn't just angry, he was a storm waiting to break. He looked at Mirae and put a finger to his lips. He slowly unscrewed the bolts of the grate. One by one, they fell into his hand. He didn't have a weapon, but he had the element of surprise. He looked at the heavy crystal chandelier hanging just below the vent. It was directly above Park's head. "When I jump," Doyun whispered to Mirae, "you stay here until I say the word, future. Do you understand?" Mirae nodded bravely. "Future." Doyun took a deep breath, coiled his muscles like a spring, and kicked the grate wide open. Doyun didn't just fall, he hunted. He landed on the heavy crystal chandelier, his weight making the golden chains groan. The sudden crash made everyone on the bridge freeze. Park dropped his wine glass, the red liquid staining the floor like blood. "What? Kill him!" Park screamed, scrambling backward. Doyun didn't wait for the guards to raise their rifles. He swung the chandelier like a giant pendulum. Crash! The heavy glass hit 2 guards, sending them flying through the bridge's windows. Shards of glass rained down like diamonds. Doyun dropped to the floor, rolling and coming up with a stolen pistol in his hand. He fired 3 times, not at the men, but at the control panels. The screens exploded in sparks. The ship's engines began to cough and die. "You're crazy!" Park yelled, pulling his own gun. "If the ship stops here, the Coast Guard will find us." "That's the point," Doyun said, his voice as cold as a grave. He dove behind the captain's desk as bullets chewed through the wood. He was trapped behind the desk, pinned down by 3 shooters. He looked up at the vent. He could see Mirae's small yellow boot. He had to finish this now, or she would be caught in the crossfire. The bridge was a mess of smoke and flashing red lights. Doyun counted the shots. 1, 2, 3. The guards were reloading. He lunged over the desk, firing with perfect accuracy. 2 guards went down. Now, it was just Doyun and Park. Park was shaking, holding his gun with both hands. "I have the remote, Doyun." Park held up a small black device. 1 click and the container Mirae was in drops. "I know she's not in there, but my men are already heading to the vents. You can't save her." Doyun felt a chill, but he didn't show it. He knew he had to distract Park. "Look at the radar, Park," Doyun said quietly. Park glanced at the screen for a split second. That was all Doyun needed. He threw his empty gun at Park's face and tackled him. They crashed through the remaining glass window and onto the rain-slicked deck outside. The wind was howling. The ship was leaning heavily to the side. Doyun pinned Park to the deck, his fist raised. "Where are they?" Doyun roared. "Where are your men?" Park laughed, blood on his teeth. "Too late, Iron Ghost. They're already at the vent." Doyun looked back at the bridge. He saw a guard's hand reaching into the ventilation shaft. His heart stopped. He had to say the word. "Future." Doyun screamed at the top of his lungs. Inside the dark ventilation shaft, Mirae heard it. Her father's voice, a roar that cut through the thunder and the rain, "Future." That was her signal. She didn't wait. A massive hand reached into the vent, fingers clawing for her raincoat, but Mirae wasn't there. She had already scrambled backward, deeper into the narrow pipes where the big men couldn't follow. "Come here, you little brat," the guard hissed, his face pressed against the grate. Mirae remembered what her father told her about hide and seek. Sometimes, you don't just hide, you trap. She saw a heavy steam valve right next to her head. It was marked with a red handle. Her father had pointed it out earlier. "If someone follows you, turn the red wheel," he had said. Mirae grabbed the wheel with both hands. She pushed with all her might. The metal was hot, but she didn't let go. Creak. The valve turned. A blast of hot, white steam erupted from the pipe right into the guard's face. He screamed, falling back off the ladder and crashing onto the bridge floor. Mirae didn't stay to watch. She crawled toward the secondary exit, her heart drumming against her ribs. She was small, she was scared, but she was a Kong. And the Kangs never gave up. If you think Mirae is the bravest kid ever, hit the like button. Outside on the deck, the rain was blinding. Doyun had his hands around Park's collar, but the ship gave a massive lurch. A giant wave slammed into the side of the vessel, sending a wall of freezing water over the railing. Park used the distraction to kick Doyun's wounded leg and scramble toward the lifeboat station. He still had the remote control in his hand. "You want her back?" Park yelled over the wind. "Go get her." He pointed the remote at the crane holding the shipping container. He pressed the button. The metal cables snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The massive steel box slid off the deck and plunged into the churning black ocean with a terrifying splash. No! Doyun screamed. For a second, his heart failed him. He thought his daughter was still inside. Park laughed, a high, crazy sound. She's at the bottom of the sea now, Doyun. You lost. But then, a small yellow figure stepped out onto the bridge balcony, high above the deck. Papa! Mirae shouted, waving her arms. Doyun's soul returned to his body. She was alive. She had made it. But Park saw her too. He raised his gun, aiming it straight at the little girl in the yellow raincoat. Doyun didn't think. He didn't have time to aim. He grabbed a heavy metal fire axe from the wall and threw it with every ounce of strength he had left. The axe spun through the rain like a propeller. The axe sliced through the curtain of rain, a silver blur against the black sky. Park pulled the trigger just as the heavy blade struck his wrist. The gun barked, but the bullet went wild, shattering a spotlight above. Park's scream was lost in the roar of the ocean as the axe embedded itself in the wooden railing behind him. Park clutched his shattered arm, the remote control clattering to the deck and sliding toward the edge. He looked at Doyun with eyes full of pure, unfiltered hate. The ship groaned, tilting further as another massive wave hit. You think you won? Park hissed, backing away toward the railing. If I go down, everyone on this ship goes down. I've set the engines to overload. We're a floating bomb, Doyun. Doyun didn't care about the ship. He didn't care about the gold or the empire. He only cared about the yellow raincoat on the balcony. He lunged forward, but the ship took a violent roll. Park lost his footing, his heels catching on the edge of the slick deck. For a split second, Doyun reached out. Not to save the man, but to grab the remote. His fingers brushed the plastic, but it was too late. Park tumbled backward over the railing, vanishing into the white foam of the Pacific, taking the remote with him. Papa! Mirae's voice was high and thin. She was clinging to the balcony railing as the ship pitched dangerously to the left. Doyun looked at the bridge. Smoke was pouring out of the windows. Park wasn't lying. The engine room was screaming, the vibration shaking the very steel beneath his boots. They had minutes before the boilers exploded. Doyun sprinted up the stairs toward the bridge, his lungs burning. He reached the balcony and scooped Mirae into his arms. She was freezing, her raincoat soaked through, but she held on to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. We have to go, Mirae. Now. He ran into the bridge, which was now filled with the smell of burning wires. The captain was slumped over the controls. Doyun pushed him aside and looked at the engine pressure gauges. They were all in the red zone. The needle was vibrating so hard it looked like it would snap. I have to vent the pressure, Doyun muttered. He looked at the control board. Everything was in a foreign language, a code he didn't know. He remembered the engine room. The red wheel Mirae had turned. There had to be a master lever here. He saw it, a large, rusted handle under a glass case labeled, emergency release. But as he reached for it, the ship took its final hit. A rogue wave, 60 feet high, slammed into the bridge. The glass shattered. A wall of water flooded the room, throwing Doyun and Mirae toward the back wall. Under the water, Doyun struggled to find Mirae. It was dark, cold, and silent. He felt a small hand grab his collar. He pulled her up as they broke the surface, the bridge half submerged. The lever was now 5 feet underwater. Stay here. Doyun shouted, pointing to a high shelf. He took a deep breath and dived back into the dark, oily water. Doyun disappeared beneath the black, swirling water. Mirae clung to the high shelf, her small heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't see anything but the flickering red lights of the submerged bridge reflecting on the water's surface. "Papa," she whispered, her voice lost in the roar of the flooding room. Under the water, Doyun was fighting for his life. The pressure was immense, and the water was thick with oil and debris. He reached the glass case, but his bare hands couldn't break it. His lungs felt like they were about to burst. He needed something hard. He felt around the submerged floor until his hand closed around a heavy brass fire extinguisher. He swung it with all his might. Crack! The glass shattered. He grabbed the rusted handle and pulled. It didn't budge. He planted his feet against the console and pulled again, his muscles screaming. Finally, the lever moved. A massive hiss echoed through the ship as the steam was released into the sky. The ship stopped shaking. The explosion had been prevented. Doyun kicked toward the surface, gasping for air as he broke the water. He grabbed Mirae and held her tight. "I've got you. I've got you." But they weren't safe yet. The ship was still sinking, and they were in the middle of a storm with no radio and no lifeboats left on this side of the deck. Doyun looked out the shattered window. In the distance, a small light was flickering. The light in the distance was getting closer. It wasn't a ship, it was a helicopter. A searchlight cut through the rain, sweeping over the deck of the dying vessel. Doyun grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit on the wall. He climbed out onto the tilted deck, bracing himself against the wind. "Over here," he shouted, though he knew they couldn't hear him. He fired the flare. A bright red star shot into the sky, lighting up the waves. The helicopter turned. As it hovered above, Doyun saw the markings on the side. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the Coast Guard. It was the Black Dragon symbol, his own organization's elite rescue team. Miho had found them. A cable dropped from the sky. A man in tactical gear descended, landing on the deck. It was Miho. He looked at Doyun, then at Mirae, and let out a breath of relief. "Boss. We thought we lost you." "Get her up first," Doyun commanded, his voice returning to its iron authority. They strapped Mirae into the rescue harness. As she was pulled up into the air, she looked down at her father. "Papa, come on." Doyun was about to grab the cable when a hand reached out from the shadows of a fallen shipping container. A soaked, bloody Park had climbed back onto the deck. He wasn't dead. And he was holding a knife. "The final battle is here. Share this with a friend who loves a good twist." Park looked like a ghost, his face pale and his eyes wide with a madness that only comes to men who have lost everything. The ship groaned, the deck tilting at a steep 45-degree angle. Behind him, the black ocean waited to swallow the rest of the steel. Doyun stood his ground, even though his leg was bleeding and his strength was fading. He didn't look at the knife in Park's hand. He looked at Park's eyes. "It's over, Park," Doyun said, his voice cutting through the wind. "The ship is gone. Your men are gone. Let it end. It only ends when you're at the bottom with me." Park lunged. The knife slashed through the air, inches from Doyun's throat. Doyun stepped back, his foot slipping on the oily deck. He grabbed a loose metal cable and swung it like a whip. The heavy steel cord wrapped around Park's arm, pulling him forward. Doyun didn't use a punch. He used the ship's own movement. As the vessel took a massive lurch into the waves, Doyun pivoted, throwing Park toward the broken railing. Park's boots skidded on the wet metal. He reached out to grab Doyun's coat, but his fingers slipped. With a final, jagged scream, Park tumbled backward. There was no splash this time, just the roar of the dark water taking back what belonged to it. Park was gone. Doyun didn't wait to watch. He grabbed the rescue cable just as the deck began to disappear under the white foam. The helicopter pulled Doyun into the air just as the cargo ship took its final breath. From 100 feet up, Doyun watched the massive vessel vanish into the black Pacific. The ocean closed over it, leaving nothing but bubbles and oil. Inside the helicopter, it was loud and smelled of fuel. Miho threw a warm blanket over Doyun's shoulders. But Doyun wasn't looking at his second-in-command. He was looking at the small girl huddled in the corner of the seat. Mirae was wrapped in a huge tactical jacket, her yellow raincoat peeking out from underneath. She was shivering, her face pale. "Mirae," Doyun whispered. She looked up. Her eyes filled with tears, and she threw herself into his arms. Doyun held her so tight his wounds hurt, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, the Iron Ghost felt a tear roll down his own cheek. "Is the game over, Papa?" she asked, her voice muffled by his chest. "Yes," Doyun said, looking out the window at the rising sun on the horizon. "The game is over. We're going home." But as the helicopter turned toward Seoul, Miho leaned in close. His face was grave. "Boss, we have a problem. The police found the shipping container at the docks. They know it was you. And the other families, they think you've gone soft because of the girl." Doyun looked at his daughter, then back at Miho. His eyes turned back into ice. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a different battlefield. "Do you think Doyun should leave the Mafia life? Type leave or stay in the comments." The helicopter cut through the morning mist as Seoul's skyline appeared on the horizon. Doyun looked at the city, a place he had conquered with blood, and realized it was no longer his kingdom. It was a giant cage. The helicopter landed on a private pad atop Doyun's fortress-like penthouse. Doctors and guards were waiting, their faces masks of professional concern. Mirae was whisked away to a medical room, her small hand finally letting go of Doyun's pinky. Doyun didn't go to the doctor. He went to his study. He poured a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. He looked at the reflection in the window. He was covered in salt, grease, and the shadows of a man who had nearly lost his soul. "The council is meeting at noon," Miho said, standing in the doorway. "They heard about the ship. They're calling you a liability, boss. They say a man with a daughter is a man with a target on his back." Doyun smashed the glass against the wall. "Let them talk. I want every entrance to this building locked. I want a 20-man guard on Mirae's door. If a single stranger breathes near her, I want their head." Miho hesitated. "And the police? They have the container. Your DNA is all over that crime scene." Doyun turned, his eyes burning. "I didn't survive a sinking ship to be taken down by a badge. Call the prosecutor. Tell him I have the files on the council's offshore accounts. If he wants a career-making arrest, he does exactly what I say." Late that night, Doyun walked into Mirae's room. She was sleeping, her breathing soft and rhythmic. She was surrounded by the toys he had bought to fill the void of his absence, but they looked like cold plastic compared to her life. He sat on the edge of the bed, his large, scarred hand resting near her head. "Papa," she murmured, her eyes half opening. "Go back to sleep, Mirae. You're safe." "I saw a man in the window," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A man with a silver mask." Doyun's heart stopped. His penthouse was on the 30th floor. There were no balconies. He looked at the window. It was locked from the inside. He checked the security monitors. The hallway was clear. The guards were in place. He walked to the window and looked down at the street below. For a split second, he saw a flash of silver in the alley across the street, a mask reflecting the moonlight. The silver mask wasn't a legend, he was a myth. The most expensive assassin in Asia. A man who never missed a target. And he wasn't here for the council. He was here for the one thing Doyun loved. Doyun realized the trap on the ship was just the beginning. The council hadn't just tried to kill him, they had put a bounty on his daughter's life. Who is the Silver Mask? Type your theories in the comments. The Silver Mask has appeared, a ghost in the moonlight, and the fortress Doyun built to protect his daughter has suddenly become a hunting ground. Doyun didn't call the guards on the radio. If the Silver Mask was already watching, the radio waves could be intercepted. He moved through the penthouse like a shadow, his feet making no sound on the marble floors. He reached into his safe and pulled out a customized pistol, not the loud, heavy one from the ship, but a silent, high-velocity weapon designed for ghosts. "Miho, don't speak. Just listen," Doyun whispered into a secure earpiece. "The Silver Mask is here. He's outside. I want the blackout protocol triggered in 10 seconds. Doyun grabbed Mirae from her bed. She was groggy, but she saw the look in his eyes and stayed silent. He carried her into a secret room hidden behind a bookshelf, a panic room lined with lead and reinforced steel. "Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone but me," Doyun commanded. "Papa, are you going to fight the Silver Man?" Mirae asked, her voice a tiny tremor. Doyun didn't answer. He couldn't promise he would win. He just closed the door. In that exact second, the power in the entire building cut out. The city lights disappeared. The penthouse plunged into total, suffocating darkness. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass echoed from the living room. It wasn't the front door. It was the skylight, 30 stories up. Doyun stood in the center of the dark living room. He wore night vision goggles that turned the world into a ghostly shade of green. He saw the Silver Mask land on the floor. The assassin didn't move like a human, he moved like smoke. He carried two long, curved blades that didn't reflect any light. "Kong Doyun," the assassin whispered. The voice sounded like metal grinding on stone. "The council has paid a lot for the girl. Step aside, and I will make your death quick." Doyun didn't speak. He fired 2 shots. The Silver Mask flipped in mid-air, dodging the bullets with impossible speed. One of the blades whistled past Doyun's ear, cutting a thin line on his cheek. They moved through the penthouse, a blur of motion. Doyun used his furniture as cover, firing and moving, while the assassin sliced through chairs and tables like they were paper. Doyun realized he couldn't win a fair fight against this man. He had to use the one thing the assassin didn't have, the penthouse's internal defense system. Doyun backed toward the kitchen, his hand reaching for a small hidden button under the counter. "You're trapped, Iron Ghost," the Silver Mask said, cornering Doyun near the window. "I'm not trapped," Doyun growled. "I'm the one who owns the house." He pressed the button. High-pressure fire-extinguishing gas flooded the room, turning the green vision of the goggles into a white blur. The white gas filled the room, making it impossible to see. In the confusion, the night vision goggles became useless. Doyun ripped them off, relying on his ears. He heard the faint shing of metal, the Silver Mask was moving through the mist, blinded but still lethal. Doyun didn't move. He held his breath, becoming as still as a statue. He knew the Silver Mask was trained to detect movement and heat. If Doyun stayed perfectly still, the cold fire-suppressant gas would hide his body heat. Swish. A blade sliced the air exactly where Doyun's head had been a second ago. The assassin was close, less than 3 feet away. Doyun could smell the metallic scent of the blades. He didn't use his gun, the muzzle flash would give away his position instantly. Instead, he reached for a heavy cast-iron pan from the kitchen rack. He swung it with a grunt of effort. Clang. The heavy metal hit the assassin's silver mask. The sound echoed through the silent penthouse. The silver mask stumbled. Doyun didn't give him a second to recover. He tackled the assassin, and they crashed through the glass doors onto the balcony. The storm outside was still raging, and the wind instantly cleared the gas. Now, 30 stories above the ground, they stood on a narrow ledge slick with rain. The silver mask adjusted his mask, which was now cracked. One eye, cold and yellow, stared at Doyun. "You are stronger than the stories say," the assassin hissed. "But strength is nothing without speed." The assassin lunged, but Doyun wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the crane from the construction site next door. The silver mask moved like a blur, his blades cutting into Doyun's arms and chest. Doyun was losing blood, his vision starting to swim. He backed up until his heels were hanging over the edge of the balcony. "Nowhere left to run," the silver mask said, raising both blades for the final strike. "I told you," Doyun gasped, blood on his lips. "I own this house." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote, not for the container, but for the construction crane next door. He pressed the button. The massive steel arm of the crane swung around with a roar of gears. The heavy iron hook hit the balcony with the force of a wrecking ball. The floor beneath the silver mask's feet crumbled. The assassin tried to jump, but Doyun grabbed his ankle. "If I go, you go," Doyun roared. The balcony collapsed. They fell together into the dark abyss. But Doyun had planned for the fall. As they tumbled, he grabbed a safety cable he had preset on the railing. The cable snapped tight, jerking Doyun's arm but stopping his fall 10 feet down. The silver mask had nothing to grab. He fell silently, a silver spark vanishing into the black streets below. Doyun hung there, his muscles tearing, gasping for air. He looked up at the broken balcony. He had survived. But then he heard a sound that made his heart stop. From inside the penthouse, a new voice spoke. A voice he hadn't heard in years. "You were always too loud, Doyun. Now, give me the girl." It was the council leader himself. He was standing right outside the panic room. The ultimate betrayal. Share this story and tell us, who is the council leader? This is it, the final showdown. Doyun is hanging by a thread, his home is invaded, and the man who pulls the strings of the entire underworld is standing at the door of his daughter's last refuge. Doyun's fingers were slipping from the safety cable. His muscles felt like they were being torn apart by hot hooks. Below him was a 300-foot drop, above him, the man who had destroyed his life was holding the handle to the panic room. Elder Shin, the council leader, stood in the dark penthouse. He was an old man with a cane, but his power was greater than any army. He looked at the heavy steel door of the panic room. "I know the code, Doyun," Shin's voice echoed out toward the balcony. "I'm the one who designed these rooms for our families. You forgot that I was your teacher before I was your enemy." Doyun let out a guttural roar. Using the last of his adrenaline, he swung his body toward the side of the building, his boots catching a narrow ledge. He unhooked the cable and lunged back through the shattered glass of the living room. He landed on the floor like a broken king, blood staining the white marble. "Stay away from her," Doyun gasped, trying to stand. Shin didn't even look at him. He began typing the code into the keypad. Beep. 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 "You've gone soft, Doyun. You chose a daughter over a kingdom. And in our world, that is a death sentence." Click. The panic room door swung open. Mirae stood there, clutching her small yellow raincoat. She looked at the old man, then at her father lying on the floor. "Mirae, run!" Doyun screamed. But Mirae didn't run. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, heavy brass fire extinguisher Doyun had used on the ship. She hadn't left it behind. "You're the bad man!" Mirae shouted. Before Shin could react, Mirae sprayed the freezing white foam directly into his face. The old man stumbled back, blinded and coughing. In that second, Doyun found his strength. He tackled Shin, pinning him to the ground and clicking a pair of handcuffs, not on the man's wrists, but to the heavy, bolted-down leg of the piano. Outside, the sound of sirens filled the air. Dozens of them. Miho had delivered the files to the prosecutor. The police weren't coming for Doyun, they were coming for the council. "It's over, Shin," Doyun whispered. "The ghost is dead. And so is your counsel." Doyun picked up Mirae and walked toward the Secret Service elevator. He didn't look back at the money, the gold, or the power. He walked out into the rain, where a clean car and a new life were waiting. 1 week later, on a quiet beach far from Korea, a little girl in a yellow raincoat ran across the sand. A man with a scarred face sat nearby, watching the horizon. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a father. You made it to the end. If you loved this story, comment freedom and tell us your favorite part. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, so you won't miss the next story. Wishing you a happy day.